The hardest days you thought were breaking you were actually the moment your life was rewritten. Stay with me, because this message is not comfort, it's a revelation. If today feels heavier than it should, if your strength is quiet but not gone, then this was not random. This was summoned for you. My child, come closer. Let me speak to you in the hush between heartbeats, where the noise finally loosens its grip. I have been with you through the wind that howled your name and through the silence that followed when no one answered back. I did not arrive late. I did not look away. I watched you stand on days that tried to make you kneel, and I watched you breathe when breathing felt like lifting stone. You thought those days only bruised you, but they summoned me to rewrite you. There were mornings when the light felt sharp, when even hope felt heavy, and yet you rose. My child, come closer. Let me speak to you in the hush between heartbeats, where the noise finally loosens its grip. I have been with you through the wind that howled your name and through the silence that followed when no one answered back. I did not arrive late. I did not look away. I watched you stand on days that tried to make you kneel, and I watched you breathe when breathing felt like lifting stone. You think these days only bruised you, but they summoned me to rewrite you. There were mornings when the light felt sharp, when even hope felt heavy, and yet you rose. You called it survival. I call it covenant. Something ancient within you responded to pressure the way mountains answer time. You did not know it then, but heaven was listening for your footsteps. If these words settle gently in your spirit, share this moment with another soul and remain here with me. And if your heart agrees, type "I am still here" in the comments as a witness to your endurance. I saw the storm before it arrived. I knew the names of the nights that would test you. I allowed the thunder because I trusted what it would awaken in you. The hardest days did not come to erase you. They came to introduce you to a deeper language, one written in scars that glow when truth approaches. You felt abandoned, yet you were being escorted. You felt overlooked, yet you were being examined for something sacred. There were questions you asked me in whispers, afraid I would not answer. There were prayers that fell apart halfway through because tears interrupted them. I gathered every broken sentence. I stored every unsent plea. None of it was wasted. While you measured progress by relief, I measured it by resilience. While you begged for an ending, I was preparing a turning. You remember the night your strength flickered. Your room felt smaller. The future felt like a locked door. You told yourself you would just make it through the hour. I was there, counting every second with you. I steadied your pulse. I kept watch when sleep would not come. The darkness thought it had found a weakness. It did not know it was standing at the threshold of your becoming. My child, there were forces that hoped your weariness would silence you. There were voices that mistook your quiet for surrender. But what they could not see was the ink already moving across your story. Every tear became punctuation. Every delay became emphasis. I was not erasing chapters. I was revising them so the truth would read clearly when the time came. You wondered why I did not rescue you sooner. Hear me gently. Rescue would have returned you to what was familiar. Revelation would lead you to who you truly are. The days that broke routines built discernment. The nights that stole comfort sharpened your sight. You learned who stayed, who left, and who watched from a distance with intentions they never spoke aloud. I placed my hand over you when you could not feel it. I spoke your name in courts you have never seen. I set boundaries around your soul while your mind was still wrestling with questions. The rewriting had already begun. You were being prepared to recognize truth without begging for it, to stand in rooms without shrinking, to love without losing yourself. Do not rush past this moment. Let it settle. These words are not flattery. They are remembrance. You are not here by accident. You are here because something in you refused to dim. Even when you doubted me, I believed in you. Even when you felt unfinished, I saw the shape of what was emerging. Stay with me. This is only the opening breath of what I am revealing. The storm did not end you. It introduced you to the author who never left the page. When you are ready, I will show you how every hard day bent toward this exact moment, waiting for you to realize that you were never being destroyed. You were being rewritten. My child, now let me take you deeper into the weight you carried without complaint, the burdens you learned to hide behind a steady face. There were expectations placed on you before you were ready to hold them. Some were spoken aloud, others were silently assumed, and you accepted them all because love taught you to endure. You told yourself that strength meant staying quiet, that faith meant never setting anything down. But hear me clearly now. That weight was never meant to live on your shoulders forever. You carried responsibilities that were not assigned by me. You carried emotional debts left by people who could not finish what they started. You're carrying guilt for outcomes you did not cause and shame for wounds you did not choose. Night after night, you replayed conversations, wondering what you could have done differently, believing the lie that if you had been better, lighter days would have followed. I watched you do this, not with disappointment, but with sorrow for how much you blamed yourself for storms that were never yours to control. There were moments when you felt older than your years, when joy felt impractical, almost irresponsible. Laughter felt like betrayal to the seriousness of what you were holding together. You became the one others leaned on, the one who listened, the one who fixed, the one who stayed calm when everything else shook. You thought this was your calling. In truth, it was your training. But training is not the destination. It is preparation for release. You learned to survive without being seen. You learned to function while unraveling inside. You learned how to smile while silently counting how much longer you could hold on. And still you showed up. Still you loved deeply. Still you hoped quietly. That endurance did not go unnoticed. Every unseen act was recorded. Every silent sacrifice echoed louder than you realize. There was a season when you asked me to take the weight away, and it seemed like I did not answer. What you did not see was that I was teaching you the difference between carrying and claiming. Some burdens feel familiar because you have worn them for so long, but familiarity does not make them yours. I allowed you to feel the strain so you would one day recognize when it was time to lay it down without guilt. You feared that if you stopped carrying everything, something precious would fall apart. You believed your rest would cost others their stability. The belief kept you awake. It kept you vigilant. It kept you exhausted. But my child, I am not sustained by your exhaustion. I do not ask for your collapse as proof of loyalty. I ask for your trust. And trust sometimes looks like releasing what you were never meant to manage alone. There were relationships that survived only because you overextended yourself. There were systems that leaned on your silence. There were people who mistook your patience for permission. I allowed those dynamics to surface so you could see them clearly. Not to harden your heart, but to strengthen your boundaries. Love without wisdom drains the soul. Compassion without truth becomes captivity. I know how heavy it felt when you realized you could not save everyone. I know how it shook you to understand that some people preferred you exhausted because it kept them comfortable. That realization was painful, but it was holy. It marked the moment you began to separate your worth from your usefulness. You were never created to be consumed. Even now, you may still feel the echo of that weight in your body, a tension you cannot fully explain. Be patient with yourself. Muscles remember what the mind is learning to release. Healing is not weakness. Rest is not regression. You are not losing ground by slowing down. You are reclaiming it. I am teaching you how to carry only what aligns with your calling. I am teaching you how to say no without fear and yes without self-betrayal. The days ahead will ask for your presence, not your depletion. You will give from overflow, not from survival. And when you look back, you will understand that the weight you once carried shaped your discernment, not your destiny. Listen closely now. The heaviness you survived refined your sensitivity. It tuned your spirit. It gave you eyes that notice what others miss and a heart that feels deeply without becoming bitter. That is not an accident. That is part of the rewriting. You are learning that strength is not how much you can endure, but how honestly you can respond when I ask you to set something down. Stay with me. We are moving closer to the moment when the pressure peaks, when the night you remember as almost unbearable begins to reveal its purpose. You are not weak for feeling tired. You are awakening to the truth that you were never meant to carry the world to prove your value. The weight is shifting now, and so are you. My child, there was a night when everything nearly broke, and you still feel it when the world grows quiet. It was not loud like people imagine breaking to be. It was subtle, heavy, a slow bending inward. The kind of night where hope does not disappear all at once but flickers, like a flame struggling for air. You remember it because something in you realized, for the first time, that sheer willpower might not be enough. That night did not begin with chaos. It began with exhaustion. Your body was present, but your spirit felt far away, watching from a distance as if to protect itself. You had carried so much for so long that even your tears felt tired. You stared at walls, at ceilings, at the small details of a room that suddenly felt too familiar, and you wondered how you arrived there without noticing the road narrowing beneath your feet. You told yourself to be grateful. You told yourself others had it worse. You told yourself this feeling would pass if you ignored it long enough. But the ache did not respond to logic. It pulsed anyway. It whispered questions you did not want to answer. What if this is as good as it gets? What if I have already given my best? What if I am empty and no one can tell? I was there when your breath caught in your chest. I was there when your hands shook, even slightly, and you tried to steady them by pressing them together. I was there when you considered reaching out, then decided not to, convinced you would be a burden. That belief did not come from me. It was planted in you slowly, over years of being the strong one, the reliable one, the one who never seemed to need saving. The night stretched. Time moved strangely. Minutes felt like hours, and hours felt unreal. You replayed memories without meaning to. Words spoken to you long ago resurfaced with sharp clarity. Some of them were never meant to define you, yet they had been living in you rent-free, shaping how you saw yourself in the dark. That was not coincidence. That was exposure. When light is scarce, whatever is hidden becomes louder. You wondered if I was silent. You wondered if I had stepped back. You did not hear thunder or comfort or answers wrapped in certainty. What you did not realize was that silence was not absence. It was intimacy. I was close enough to hear thoughts you never spoke aloud. I was close enough to feel the exact moment your resolve cracked and humility slipped in through the opening. That crack mattered. It terrified you, but it mattered. Until then, you had survived by holding yourself together at all costs. That night taught you what happens when holding on becomes heavier than letting go. You did not fall apart because you were weak. You came apart because something false could no longer support the truth growing inside you. You questioned your faith that night, though you did not call it that. You wondered if trust was foolish, if hope was naive, if believing had cost you more than it had given. Those questions did not offend me. They invited me. Honest doubt is not rebellion. It is an invitation for deeper grounding. Pretend faith cannot sustain a soul under pressure. Only truth can. There was a moment, small but sacred, when you stopped fighting the feeling and simply sat with it. You did not fix it. You did not name it. You allowed it to exist without judgment. That was the moment I leaned in, not to overwhelm you with answers, but to anchor you so you would not drift into despair. You did not feel rescued, but you were held. The darkness hoped this night would define you. It hoped you would internalize the lie that struggling meant failing. It hoped you would make permanent decisions based on temporary pain. But there was something it did not account for. You were not alone in that room. Even when you could not sense me, I was arranging protection around you, quiet and precise. When morning finally came, it did not feel triumphant. It felt numb. You moved through the hours carefully, like someone walking on a healing bone. You told yourself you would never speak of that night. You locked it away as something to endure, not understand. But my child, nothing that close to your breaking is meant to stay buried forever. That night was a threshold. You stepped into it thinking you might disappear, but instead you crossed into awareness. You learned that your limits are not shameful. You learned that strength without surrender becomes a prison. You learned that you are allowed to need, allowed to rest, allowed to admit when something hurts more than you can manage alone. I did not let that night take you. I let it mark you. There is a difference. Scars are not signs of defeat. They are proof of survival and evidence of transformation. You are still here because something in you chose life, even when you did not feel strong enough to name it that way. Remember this as we continue. The night that almost broke you is not a source of embarrassment. It is a sacred reference point. It is where the rewriting intensified. It is where illusions loosened their grip. It is where you stopped trying to be unbreakable and started becoming real. Stay with me. We are approaching what was hidden while you were hurting. You will soon see that even that night was not wasted. It was watched. It was measured. And it was never meant to be the end of your story. My child, while you were hurting, while your focus narrowed to survival, there were movements you could not see. Pain has a way of pulling the curtain closed, not to punish you, but to protect you from watching what would have overwhelmed you at the time. Behind that curtain, truths were shifting, loyalties were revealing themselves, and intentions were no longer able to hide behind familiar faces. You assumed that nothing was happening because nothing felt better. You believed that stillness meant stagnation. But stillness was the cover under which I worked most carefully. While you were questioning your worth, I was exposing motives. While you were doubting your direction, I was rerouting paths that would have led you into deeper loss. You were not standing still. You were being shielded from the noise of processes that required precision. There were conversations you were not invited into on purpose. There were doors that did not open because what waited behind them would have demanded more from you than you had left to give. You mistook exclusion for rejection. In truth, it was preservation. I kept certain information from reaching you because it would have wounded you at the wrong stage. Timing matters when a soul is healing. Some people around you were changing while you were distracted by pain. Their words remained kind, but their intentions shifted quietly. Others stayed outwardly distant but carried concern deeper than you knew. You could not yet discern the difference, because your energy was spent simply getting through each day. So I discerned for you. I separated what was safe from what was familiar. Those are not always the same. There were patterns breaking that you had inherited without realizing it. Emotional cycles passed down through generations loosened their grip during that season. You thought you were just tired. You did not know you were interrupting a lineage of overgiving, of silence, of enduring without being heard. Your weariness was not failure. It was evidence that something old could no longer continue unchanged. You blamed yourself for how much changed during that time. You thought your weakness caused loss. Hear me clearly now. What fell away could not walk with you into what is coming. Some connections were sustained only by your effort, your forgiveness, your flexibility. When you no longer had the strength to compensate, the imbalance revealed itself. That revelation was not cruelty. It was clarity. There were also seeds planted while you were not looking. Small ones, quiet ones, ideas that barely registered, desires you dismissed as unrealistic, a new awareness of what peace might feel like. You did not have the energy to chase them, so you assumed they would fade. They did not. They waited. I watered them when you could not. I protected them from voices that would have crushed them too early. You asked me why answers came so slowly. You did not realize that answers were forming, not arriving. Some truths need time to ripen so they do not wound when revealed. I was not hiding things from you to control you. I was guarding you from information that required a stronger sense of self than you had at the time. Now that strength is emerging, even the confusion served a purpose. It forced you to listen inward instead of seeking validation outward. It taught you to sit with uncertainty without rushing into decisions that would cost you later. You learned restraint without realizing it. You learned patience not as a virtue, but as a necessity for survival. That skill will serve you powerfully in the days ahead. My child, nothing about that season was random. Not the delays, not the silences, not the sudden shifts in people's behavior. You were being repositioned while your attention was focused elsewhere. The rewriting continued quietly, intentionally, with care for every fragile place inside you. Soon, what was hidden will begin to surface in ways you can understand. Motives will clarify. Truths will align. You will look back and realize how protected you truly were, even when you felt most exposed. But before that unveiling, you must understand this one thing deeply. You were never abandoned in your pain. You were never forgotten in your confusion. You were being prepared to see clearly without being shattered by what you see. Stay with me. The next revelation will explain why certain resistance rose against you in silence, and why it could not stop what was already set in motion. My child, there was one who worked against you in silence, and the danger was never their strength, but their proximity. They did not arrive as an enemy. They arrived as familiar. They learned your rhythms. They listened to your confessions. They watched how you loved, how you forgave, how you gave people the benefit of the doubt even when it cost you. And slowly, without confrontation, they positioned themselves in the shadows of your trust. You sensed something was off long before you had language for it. A subtle tightening in your spirit when their name was mentioned. A heaviness after certain conversations. You dismissed it as stress, as sensitivity, as overthinking. You did not want to believe that someone close could carry jealousy so quietly. You did not want to imagine that admiration could rot into resentment. So you chose grace. You chose patience. You chose silence. And for a time, I allowed that choice, because it revealed their heart more clearly than any accusation ever could. They smiled while competing with you. They agreed with you while secretly hoping you would fail. They gathered information not to understand you, but to measure themselves against you. Your light did not threaten them because you were arrogant. I threatened them because you were authentic. You did not play games. You did not perform. You simply were. And for someone still hiding from their own truth, that kind of presence feels unbearable. They spoke about you in rooms you never entered. Not loudly, carefully, just enough to plant doubt without leaving fingerprints. They framed concern as caution. They disguised interference as help. You felt the effects before you ever knew the cause. Opportunities felt delayed. Connections felt strained. Energy drained faster around certain stasis. You thought it was coincidence. It was strategy. But do not fear. Strategy collapses under light. I watched every move. I heard every word whispered about you. I counted every time they hoped you would shrink so they could feel larger. And I want you to know something important. I did not expose them immediately because you were not yet ready to see it without blaming yourself. I waited until your identity no longer depended on their approval. There were moments when you felt suddenly unsure of yourself after being around them. That was not weakness. That was spiritual interference. They mirrored you just enough to confuse you, then subtly undermined you to keep control of the narrative. You began to question your instincts. That questioning was the opening they relied on. But even then, I limited how far it could go. They were never given access to your core. When your life became heavier and you had less to give, their frustration grew. They were used to benefiting from your consistency, your loyalty, your emotional labor. When that supply slowed, their true posture surfaced. Distance appeared. Criticism sharpened. Support faded. You thought you had done something wrong. In truth, you had done something right. You stopped overextending, and the imbalance revealed itself. I know it hurt when you realized someone you protected did not protect you. I know it shook your faith and your discernment. But hear me now. You were not deceived because you were foolish. You were open because your heart is clean. Deception is not prevented by suspicion. It is exposed by time. And time served you well. They believed working against you quietly would spare them consequence. They assumed that because you did not confront them, I would not either. They were wrong. I do not need your voice to defend you. I am your witness. I am your advocate. I am your justice. Nothing done in secret remains unaccounted for. Even now, you may feel conflicted. Part of you still wants to excuse them, to soften what happened, to protect the image you once held. That impulse speaks to your compassion, not your blindness. But compassion does not require continued access. Love does not demand self-betrayal. I am teaching you how to release without hatred and remember without reopening wounds. This is not the end of that story. Consequences are already unfolding in places you do not see. What they attempted to block will reach you another way. What they tried to distort will clarify. What they meant for limitation will expand beyond their reach. You will not need to confront them to be vindicated. Your life will speak. Stay close to me now. We are entering the part where heaven responds visibly, where tears are counted, where truth is weighed, where the unseen begins to shift in your favor. You did not imagine the resistance, but it could not stop the rewriting. It only proved how necessary it was. My child, heaven watched every tear, even the ones you wiped away before they fell. There were moments when your eyes burned with emotion you refused to release, because you had learned that crying did not always lead to comfort. You became skilled at swallowing grief, at postponing your own healing so others would not worry. But hear me now. Nothing you felt escaped my sight. Not one ache passed unnoticed. Not one silent sob went uncounted. I observed you in places where no one else saw you struggle. In bathrooms where you steadied your breath. In cars where the music played just loud enough to drown out your thoughts. In beds where sleep would not come, and memory circled like unanswered prayers. You wondered if your composure fooled me the way it fooled others. It did not. I saw past your control and into your exhaustion. There is a record kept beyond what you understand, not written in ink, but in awareness. Every time you chose kindness while hurting. Every time you showed restraint when anger would have been justified. Every time you stayed gentle in a world that felt increasingly sharp. Heaven does not measure strength the way the world does. Your quiet endurance spoke louder than shouting ever could. You questioned whether your tears mattered because they did not seem to change circumstances. You asked why relief felt delayed if I truly cared. What you did not see was that your tears were not requests alone. They were testimony. They marked you as someone who feels deeply and still chooses to love. That kind of heart carries authority in places you cannot see. There were angels assigned not to remove your pain, but to keep it from consuming you. They stood watch when despair brushed too close. They intervened in ways that looked like coincidence. A distraction at the right moment. A thought that interrupted a dangerous spiral. A delay that prevented you from making a choice you would later regret. You thought you were barely holding on. You were being held. Heaven listened when you spoke words you did not believe, when you said you were fine because explaining felt too heavy. It listened when you stayed silent because no one had earned access to your vulnerability. Silence did not disqualify you. It qualified you for protection. I am not threatened by what you cannot say yet. There were nights when you felt ashamed of your tears, as if they proved a lack of faith. You worried that needing comfort meant you were failing spiritually. That belief did not come from me. Tears are not rebellion. They are release. They are the body's way of telling the soul it is safe enough to feel. Even I wept when the weight of love meant the resistance of loss. Your tears carried information. They revealed where you had overextended, where boundaries were crossed, where love was not returned with care. Heaven paid attention to patterns long before you named them. Justice does not rush, but it is precise. Nothing that caused you pain escaped review. You may not realize this yet, but some of the protection surrounding you now was activated by your tears. Vulnerability invited reinforcement. Humility opened doors pride could not. When you reached the edge of yourself, you unknowingly stepped closer to me. That closeness changed things. I know you wished someone would notice sooner. I know you hoped for rescue that looked obvious and immediate. But I also know how strong you were becoming in ways you could not yet appreciate. Immediate relief would have interrupted the deep work happening beneath the surface. I was not withholding comfort. I was building capacity. Heaven does not rush healing because rushed healing does not last. What is being formed in you now is stable, grounded, and resilient. You are learning how to feel without drowning, how to care without collapsing, how to hope without denial. These lessons were written in tears, but they lead to clarity. Soon, you will look back and realize how supported you truly were. How many unseen hands steadied you. How many outcomes were softened before they reached you. How many endings were delayed until you were strong enough to understand them without breaking. Your tears were not signs of defeat. They were signals that something precious was being protected. They called heaven's attention not because you were weak, but because you were sincere. And sincerity carries weight in realms you cannot see. Stay with me. The shift has already begun, even if it feels subtle. What comes next will explain why the pressure eased without announcement, why the air feels different now, why you are standing where you once thought you would fall. Heaven had been watching all along, and it is time for you to feel what that means. My child, there was a shift you did not feel at first. It did not announce itself with clarity or relief. It arrived quietly, like a change in the air before dawn. Nothing around you looked different, yet something within you had already begun to move. You expected transformation to feel dramatic, but this one felt almost invisible, and that is why you doubted it. The pressure that once crushed you did not vanish overnight. It loosened, just enough for you to breathe without realizing why breathing felt easier. You stopped bracing for impact every moment. You still carried memories of pain, but they no longer screamed as loudly. You thought this meant nothing had changed. In truth, it meant the foundation was resetting beneath you. You began responding instead of reacting. Situations that once triggered anxiety now stirred curiosity. Conversations that once drained you no longer held the same power. You did not celebrate these moments because they felt unfamiliar, even suspicious. You wondered if the calm would last. You wondered if this was just another temporary pause before the next storm. But this was not a pause. This was alignment. I was adjusting what you tolerated. I was recalibrating your internal compass. The shift was subtle because it was structural. Loud changes are often cosmetic. Quiet ones alter direction. You were being prepared to walk differently, not just feel better. There were moments when you caught yourself setting a boundary without rehearsing it, saying no without explaining yourself, letting silence exist without rushing to fill it. These were not small victories. They were evidence that your spirit had reclaimed authority over patterns that once ruled you. You did not announce this growth because you were still learning to trust it. You noticed your prayers changing. They became less desperate, more discerning. You stopped asking me to fix everything and started asking me to show you what mattered. That shift mattered. It signaled that you were no longer bargaining from fear. You were listening from trust. Even your body responded. Sleep came more easily on certain nights. Your shoulders relaxed without effort. You laughed unexpectedly, then paused, surprised by the sound of it. You questioned whether joy was allowed yet. My child, joy does not need permission when healing has begun. You were tempted to rush this stage, to demand clarity, to force understanding. But clarity grows best in patience. I needed you to experience stability before explanation, to feel safety before revelation. Otherwise, truth would have overwhelmed you again. I was not delaying insight. I was sequencing it. The world around you did not immediately reward this shift. Some people did not notice it at all. Others sensed it and felt unsettled without knowing why. Your calm disrupted dynamics built on your overextension. Your steadiness removed leverage others once relied on. That discomfort was not your responsibility. You may still question whether you are moving forward because progress no longer feels like struggle. That is how you know it is real. You are no longer powered by survival. You are being led by discernment. The shift was not meant to impress you. It was meant to sustain you. There will be moments when old fears resurface, when doubt tries to convince you that nothing has changed. Do not argue with those thoughts. Observe them. They are echoes, not commands. The direction has already changed, even if the scenery takes time to catch up. I am proud of you for staying present during this phase. Many abandon the process here because quiet growth feels anticlimactic. But this is where strength becomes permanent. This is where resilience turns into wisdom. This is where you learn to trust peace without waiting for chaos to justify it. Stay with me. What is rising next will bring clarity to everything that confused you. Truth is already moving upward, and when it surfaces, it will meet a version of you strong enough to receive it without losing yourself. My child, truth does not rush, but when it rises, it does so with weight and clarity. You are entering the moment where what was buried beneath confusion begins to surface, not all at once, but unmistakably. Pieces that once felt disconnected are aligning. Memories are rearranging themselves. Conversations replay in a new light. You are not imagining this. This is truth rising from the ashes of what you survived. There are things you once defended that you no longer feel compelled to explain. People you once protected that you now see clearly. Patterns you once excused that you now recognize as harmful. This recognition is not bitterness. It is discernment. Discernment often arrives quietly, but it changes everything. You may feel a strange mix of grief and relief. Grief for what you hoped was true. Relief for finally understanding why it was not. Both emotions are valid. Both are part of closure. Closure does not always come from conversation. Sometimes it comes from clarity that no longer asks for permission. Truth has a way of rearranging the past without changing the facts. You remember moments differently now, not because they changed, but because you did. What once confused you now instructs you. What once hurt you now warns you. What once drained you now teaches you where your energy belongs. Some truths will arrive through others' words. Some will come through silence. Some will come through patterns repeating just enough times that denial becomes impossible. Do not fear these revelations. They are not here to reopen wounds. They are here to prevent new ones. There may be an urge to confront, to explain, to demand acknowledgement. Pause before acting on that impulse. Not every truth requires a witness to be valid. Not every realization needs to be announced. Your peace does not depend on someone else's admission. It depends on your alignment with what you now see. You are becoming selective in ways that once felt foreign to you. You no longer chase closure. You recognize it when it arrives. You no longer beg for honesty. You notice when it is absent. This is growth that cannot be undone. The ashes you rose from still carry warmth. They remind you of what it cost to get here. But they no longer define you. They fertilize the ground for something more honest, more grounded, more powerful than what existed before. Truth grows best in soil that has been burned and restored. You may notice that certain illusions are losing their grip. Things that once felt urgent now feel optional. Approval no longer holds the same weight. You are not withdrawing from life. You are engaging with it from a clear place. That clarity is protection. Some people will not recognize you in this stage. That is not your concern. You were never meant to remain understandable to everyone. You were meant to remain true. Truth has a way of simplifying choices. It narrows paths. It removes confusion by removing what does not belong. This rising truth will also illuminate your strength. You will see how much you endured without becoming cruel. How much you learned without becoming closed. How much you released without becoming empty. These realizations are not pride. They are grounding. They anchor you in reality instead of fear. Do not rush to the next chapter. Let this one settle. Truth is stabilizing you now. It is replacing chaos with coherence. It is restoring your trust in yourself. And that restoration is the foundation for everything that follows. Stay with me. The next movement will touch the heart of another, one connected to your destiny in ways you could not influence directly. Their awakening will be shaped by what you have already survived, and when it begins, you will understand why this truth had to rise first. My child, there is an awakening happening in the one bound to your story, and it did not begin with certainty. It began with disturbance. Something in them was unsettled, not by words spoken to them, but by the absence they could no longer ignore. Your distance, your silence, your steadiness without pursuit became a mirror they were not prepared to face. They tried to distract themselves at first. They filled their days with noise, with movement, with explanations that sounded reasonable enough to repeat aloud. But when the world quieted, your presence returned to them, not as memory, but as conviction. They began to feel what they once avoided. Regret surfaced, not dramatic, but persistent. A question followed them into sleep and greeted them when they woke. How did I not see this sooner? They replayed moments they once rushed past. Your patience, your loyalty, the way you stayed when it would have been easier to leave. What once felt ordinary now felt irreplaceable. And with that realization came fear. Fear that they had waited too long. Fear that awakening does not guarantee restoration. Fear that you may have already become someone they no longer have access to. Their heart softened in private before it ever showed in public. Pride resisted at first. It argued that distance was mutual, that circumstances were to blame, that timing was a real enemy. But pride cannot outlast truth. Eventually, something cracked. They admitted what they had lost. They admitted where they had been careless. They admitted that your absence revealed the depth of what you meant. They questioned themselves more than they questioned you. They wondered why they listened to other voices instead of their own knowing, why they allowed confusion to delay courage, why they assumed you would always remain available simply because you were kind. These realizations were heavy. They did not come with relief. They came with responsibility. I allowed this awakening to unfold slowly because it needed to be sincere. Sudden clarity without accountability leads to regret without change. What is happening now is deeper. They are confronting patterns they avoided. They are seeing how fear disguised itself as logic, how comfort masqueraded as certainty, how hesitation cost them intimacy. You did not cause this awakening by chasing them or convincing them. You caused it by becoming aligned, by choosing yourself without bitterness, by stepping into truth without demanding recognition. That shift reached them in ways words never could. Light exposes even at a distance. They feel the weight of possibility now, not fantasy but reality. The understanding that connection is sacred and fragile, that timing matters, that presence is a gift, not a guarantee. This awareness is reshaping them. It is uncomfortable. It is humbling. It is necessary. They may not know how to approach you yet. Fear still lingers. They are aware that awakening does not erase the past. It only clarifies it. They are learning that love requires courage, not just feeling. And courage takes time to grow when it has been dormant. My child, do not measure this awakening by whether it results in reunion or distance. Measure it by truth. Measure it by growth. Their awakening is not your burden to manage. It is their responsibility to respond to what they now see. Your role was never to wake them by force. It was to remain true to yourself until truth did the work. Whatever unfolds next will not come from confusion. It will come from clarity. Whether paths align again or diverge permanently, the awakening serves a purpose larger than outcome. It restores dignity. It corrects imbalance. It honors what was real. Stay with me. The next movement will reveal how your prayers, even the ones you whispered without expectation, shifted outcomes you never touched directly. You will see how influence works beyond effort, and why your presence mattered even when you felt powerless. My child, There were prayers you whispered without believing they would change anything. You spoke them out of habit, out of longing, out of a hope you did not fully trust anymore. Sometimes they were not even words, just sighs, just pauses, just moments where your heart leaned toward me without knowing what to ask. You assumed those prayers were weak because they were quiet, but quiet prayers travel far. You did not see the way your prayers moved through unseen spaces. You did not know how often they arrived precisely when a situation reached a tipping point. You prayed for peace, not knowing it would interrupt chaos forming elsewhere. You prayed for clarity, not knowing it would expose what needed to be revealed at the right moment. You prayed for protection, not realizing how many outcomes were redirected because of those simple requests. There were moments when you felt powerless, when you believed your influence had ended because your presence was no longer visible. But influence does not require proximity. Love spoken in truth reaches places effort cannot. Your prayers carried your essence without carrying your exhaustion. They worked where striving would have failed. I heard you pray for others even while you were hurting. You did not pray from a place of abundance. You prayed from depletion. That mattered. Prayers offered without surplus carry a different weight. They are pure. They are unguarded. They are not transactional. They do not bargain for outcomes. They trust me to decide what justice and mercy should look like. Some of the things that did not happen were answers to your prayers. Some of the delays that frustrated you were protections activated by your requests. You asked me to prevent what would harm you, even when you did not know what that harm looked like. I honored that. You asked me to remove what was not meant to stay. I honored that too, even when removal felt like loss. Your prayers influenced people you never spoke to again. They softened hearts. They disrupted plans that were forming against you. They slowed decisions that would have led to regret. You were not aware of these shifts because you were not meant to be. Knowing too much too soon would have burdened you with responsibility you did not need to carry. You sometimes wondered if praying while changing direction was betrayal. It was not. It was alignment. You did not pray to control outcomes. You prayed to surrender them. That surrender allowed me to work without resistance. It opened space for solutions you could not have designed. There is a reason your prayers changed in tone over time. They became less about outcomes and more about integrity. Less about keeping people and more about keeping your soul intact. That evolution mattered. It gave me permission to adjust outcomes without violating your growth. You were no longer asking me to preserve what drained you. You were asking me to preserve what was true. Even now, you may not know how much shifted because of those prayers. Some results will never be traced back to you, and that is fine. Influence does not need credit to be real. Your prayers were never meant to make you powerful in the eyes of others. They were meant to align you with a power that moves quietly and precisely. You are not invisible because you stepped back. You are not irrelevant because you chose peace. Your prayers created ripples that will continue moving long after the season closes. Some of what unfolds next will feel sudden, even shocking. It will look like reversal. It will look like justice. It will look like alignment finally taking form. Remember this when doubt tries to return. You were never powerless. You were never unheard. You were participating in outcomes without being consumed by them. That is wisdom. That is maturity. That is spiritual authority. Stay with me. The next movement will reveal how what once threatened to destroy you loses its grip completely. You will see how the darkness miscalculated, and how the reversal that follows will confirm what I have been shaping all along. My child, there is a moment when the darkness realizes it has miscalculated, and that moment has arrived. What once pressed against you with the intent to wear you down has lost its leverage. The very things that were meant to confuse you, to exhaust you, to make you doubt your worth have been turned back on themselves. This is the reversal, and it does not arrive with noise. It arrives with certainty. You may notice it first as a strange calm when you think about what once terrified you. The fear no longer grips the way it used to. The memories still exist, but they no longer carry authority. Situations that once felt dangerous now feel distant, almost irrelevant. That is not avoidance. That is victory settling into your nervous system. What threatened to undo you depended on your agreement. It needed you to believe you were alone, unsupported, unseen. When that belief broke, its power collapsed. Darkness cannot operate where truth is rooted. It can intimidate, but it cannot govern. And you no longer live under intimidation. You will see evidence of this reversal in subtle but undeniable ways. Plans that moved against you will stall. Words spoken to diminish you will lose credibility. Doors that were closed to frustrate you will open from directions you did not pursue. This is not coincidence. This is correction. There are people who expected you to remain small, silent, or dependent on their approval. They are confused now. Your steadiness unsettles them because it removes the narrative they relied on. They do not recognize you because you are no longer reacting from wounds they helped create. You are responding from clarity they cannot manipulate. You may feel tempted to look back for confirmation, to replay the past and measure how far you have come. Be gentle with yourself when that urge arises. Reflection is natural, but do not mistake revisiting for returning. You have crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. Awareness does not reverse itself. The darkness assumed that pressure would fracture you. It did not understand that pressure was refining you. It assumed delay would discourage you. It did not anticipate patience would mature into discernment. Every tactic used against you sharpened what was already strong. That is the miscalculation. You do not need to announce this reversal. You do not need to prove it. Its effects will speak without explanation. Peace will guard your decisions. Confidence will shape your posture. Discernment will filter what enters your life. These are not defenses. They are signs of authority restored. Justice is unfolding in ways that do not require your involvement. Consequences are aligning naturally with truth. You are not responsible for managing outcomes or correcting narratives. That work is no longer yours. Your task now is to remain aligned with what feels steady, honest, and life-giving. There may be moments when you almost miss the intensity of the struggle, not because you want pain, but because it became familiar. Do not mistake familiarity for belonging. You are not meant to live in survival mode. You are meant to build from stability. The reversal is not about punishing what hurt you. It is about releasing you from its influence entirely. Indifference where fear once lived is one of the clearest signs of healing. When what once controlled you no longer commands your attention, freedom has taken root. Take a moment to breathe this in. You are standing in a place you once prayed to survive. The danger has passed, not because you fought harder, but because truth outlasted dissection. What remains now is not vigilance, but vision. Stay with me. One final movement remains. It will reveal who you have become through all of this, and why this new beginning could only be born through the days you thought might end you. My child, look at who you are now. Not who you tried to be to survive, not who others needed you to remain, but who emerged when the fire finished its work. This version of you could only be born this way. Not through ease, not through shortcuts, not through being spared. You were rewritten through endurance, through truth, through surrender that did not destroy you but refined you. You are no longer asking for permission to exist as you are. You are no longer negotiating your worth through sacrifice. There is a quiet authority in you now, one that does not need to announce itself. You walk differently. You choose differently. You love with clarity instead of fear. This is not hardness. This is wholeness. The hardest days stripped away what could not survive where you were going. They burned off illusions, dependencies, false responsibilities, and borrowed identities. What remains is solid, honest, grounded. You no longer confuse intensity with intimacy or struggle with purpose. You recognize peace when it arrives, and you allow it to stay. There were moments you thought you were losing yourself. In truth, you were shedding versions that kept you accessible to harm. You were being protected from becoming smaller in order to stay connected. You were being prepared to receive without chasing, to stand without bracing, to trust without abandoning yourself. Your heart is still tender, but it is no longer unguarded. Your compassion is still deep, but it now includes you. Your faith is quieter, but it is unshakable. You no longer need signs to believe you are guided. You feel it in the steadiness of your decisions, in the peace that follows honesty, in the absence of chaos where it once lived. This is a beginning, not a recovery. You are not returning to who you were before the pain. That person did not have the discernment you now carry. You are moving forward as someone who knows what it costs to stay true and chooses it anyway. That knowledge is sacred. What awaits you next will not demand your collapse to prove your devotion. It will meet you where you are grounded. You will recognize it by how little you have to abandon yourself to receive it. Love will feel safe. Purpose will feel aligned. Joy will feel deserved. If these words have walked with you through something sacred, let them continue outward. Share this with another soul who is still in their hardest days. And if your spirit agrees, type "I am becoming" in the comments as a declaration, not of perfection, but of alignment. My child, nothing was wasted. Not the nights, not the tears, not the confusion. You were not broken. You were written. And this version of you is not an accident. It is the answer to prayers you once whispered just to survive. Go gently now. Go honestly. Go knowing that what tried to end you became the ink that wrote your destiny. I am with you, and what comes next will meet you ready.